She never knew how close she was to danger until a small voice stopped her from standing up. The voice did not shout, it did not rush, but it carried fear that felt old and tired, the kind that comes from someone who has seen loss before. Laura felt her chest tighten before her mind understood why. Hi, my amazing friends and family. Welcome back to another story. If you're ready to enjoy this heartwarming one, please subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. I truly love seeing your names and places. And don't forget to explore more beautiful stories here on the channel. Now let's get into today's story. Laura had not planned to stay long in that cafe. She only wanted a place to sit and rest her thoughts after another long day of pretending she was fine. She chose the seat by the wall without thinking, because that was how her body worked now, always watching, always careful, even when she told herself the past was over. The coffee sat in front of her, untouched, while her eyes stayed on the window, not because she was looking for trouble, but because some habits do not leave when the uniform comes off. People walked in and out, and no one paid her any attention, which was exactly what she wanted, because attention had once cost her everything. She was just about to stand when she felt someone close enough to share her space, and before she could turn, the girl spoke again, this time slower, almost like she was choosing each word with care, and she said, "Please don't go yet." And Laura stayed still, not out of kindness, but because the fear in that child's voice sounded real, not playful, not imagined. Laura asked softly, "What is it?" And the girl answered, "They have been waiting for you." And those words pulled Laura back into a life she thought she had buried, a life of quiet warnings and moments where one wrong move changed everything. Laura did not look outside, not yet, because she already knew what she would see, and instead she asked the girl why she cared, and the girl said, "Because my father ignored a feeling like this once, and he never came home." And Laura felt something break open inside her, something she had kept locked for years. That was the moment Laura understood this was not about coffee, or rest, or a random child, but about a choice she had to make right then, to listen or to walk away, and as she slowly rose from her seat, she realized the men outside had noticed too, and the way they shifted told her this story was only just beginning. Laura stayed standing, but she did not rush, because rushing always gave fear away, and fear invited mistakes. She picked up her cup, not to drink it, but to give her hands something steady to do, and then she looked at the girl properly for the first time. The girl was small, too calm for her age, with eyes that had learned how to watch people instead of trust them, and Laura knew that look because she had worn it herself for many years. "What's your name?" Laura asked, keeping her voice low, and the girl answered, "Maya." After a short pause, as if names were things you only gave when you were sure, Laura nodded and said, "All right, Maya, you did the right thing by speaking." And Maya swallowed hard, because no adult had said those words to her in a long time. Laura did not ask about the men yet. She did not ask how long they had been there, because those answers would come soon enough, and instead she asked the one question that mattered most, "Are you alone?" And Maya shook her head and pointed down, where a brown dog sat close to her legs, quiet and alert, not moving but watching everything, and Laura felt a tight pull in her chest because she trusted animals more than people. Laura said, "We're going to walk to the back door." And she said it like it was nothing special, like it was the most normal thing in the world, because panic spreads faster than danger. Maya nodded again, and she stayed close, so close that Laura could feel her shaking through the sleeve of her jacket. And as they moved, Laura noticed the small things she always noticed, the way one of the men outside leaned forward when they stood, the way the other shifted his weight, the way waiting turned into action. Laura's phone buzzed in her pocket, and she did not check it, because she already knew who it was not, and sometimes knowing what something is not matters more than knowing what it is. As they reached the back, Laura spoke quietly to the man behind the counter and said, "There are two men outside who shouldn't be here." And she did not explain further, because truth spoken calm is often believed faster than long stories. The man looked at her face, really looked, and something there made him nod without asking questions. When the back door opened, cold brushed their faces, and Maya hesitated for a second, not because she was scared of the cold, but because she was scared of being seen, and Laura placed a hand on her shoulder and said, "Stay with me." And those words meant more than protection, they meant promise. Outside, the narrow space felt smaller than it was, and Laura's thoughts moved faster now, but she kept her body slow, because that was how you survived moments like this. One of the men stepped closer, not fast, not loud, but sure, and Laura felt the old anger rise, the kind that comes when you realize someone thinks they own your fear. Maya whispered, "They followed?" And Laura nodded, because there was no point denying what they both knew. Laura crouched so her eyes met Maya's and said, "Listen to me, you are not in trouble, and you are not wrong for noticing things. Some people see danger because they have learned how." And Maya's eyes filled, but she did not cry, because children who have lost too much learn to hold tears like secrets. The dog moved forward then, not to attack, not to threaten, but to stand between them and the men, and Laura respected that choice, because courage comes in many forms. Headlights turned into the space, bright and sudden, and Laura finally let out a breath she had been holding since the first whisper, because help had arrived, not because she was lucky, but because she had listened. The men stopped, not angry, not shocked, but careful, and that careful look told Laura this was not a mistake. This was something planned, something unfinished. Later, when the questions were asked and answered, when names were written down and hands stopped shaking, Laura sat back inside the cafe with Maya across from her, and the noise of the world returned like nothing had happened, but everything had changed. Maya said softly, "My dad used to say feelings are warnings," and Laura replied, "He was right." And in that moment, Laura knew this story was not about being followed, or being watched, or even being afraid, but about the cost of ignoring quiet truths. As Laura stood to leave, she felt that pull again, that sense that the moment was not done with her yet, and when she looked back at Maya, she saw something new there, not fear but trust, and that scared Laura more than the men ever could, because trust meant responsibility, and responsibility meant this was only the beginning. And as Laura reached the door, Maya spoke again, not whispering this time, but not loud either, just steady, and she said, "They didn't come for the first time today?" And Laura stopped with her hand still on the handle, her body stiff before her mind caught up, and she turned slowly and asked, "What do you mean?" And Maya looked down at the floor before lifting her eyes again and saying, "They came before, last week, and the week before that, but you were the first person they watched the whole time." And something cold moved through Laura because waiting men did not wait without reason, and Laura knelt slightly so her voice would not carry and said, "Did anyone else notice them?" And Maya shook her head and said, "People don't look anymore." And Laura felt a quiet anger rise, not sharp, not loud, just heavy, because she knew how easy it was to hide in plain sight, and she reached into her pocket and took out her phone, not to make a call, but to check something she had hoped she would never see again, and there it was, a message she had ignored earlier, no name, no number, just one line that read, "We know where you rest now," and Laura closed her eyes for a second because the past had finally caught up to her, and when she opened them, Maya was watching her closely, and Laura realized this child had stepped into a storm without knowing its size, and she could not walk away anymore, not from the girl, not from the truth, not from herself, and Laura said softly, "You need to go home now." And Maya nodded but did not move, and instead she asked, "Will they come back?" And Laura did not lie, she did not soften it, she only said, "Yes." And Maya's face did not change, but her hands tightened, and Laura added, "But not the way they planned." And as Laura finally pushed the door open and stepped out into the cold, she understood that saving herself was no longer enough, because somewhere between a warning and a look of trust, she had been pulled back into a fight she never truly left, and behind her, unseen, one of the men across the street raised his phone again, not to watch but to report, and the message he sent was short, clear, and final, target confirmed. Laura did not turn around as she stepped outside, because she already knew they were still there, and knowing was enough. She walked toward the road with steady steps, not because she felt brave, but because stopping would have meant thinking, and thinking would have broken her calm. The street looked normal, too normal, and that made her chest feel tight, because danger never shows itself the way people expect. Cars passed, someone crossed the road with shopping bags, and the world kept moving as if nothing had happened. Yet Laura felt like she had just crossed an invisible line. She reached her car and paused with her hand on the door, because the past has a way of standing up when you try to leave it behind, and she remembered how many times she had told herself it was over, how many nights she had convinced herself she was safe now. She sat inside the car without starting it, resting her head against the seat for a moment, breathing slow, counting quietly, because control always starts with breath. Then her phone vibrated again. She did not jump. She did not rush. She only looked down and saw the message she had hoped would never come back into her life. It had no name, no number, just words that felt too close, too personal, like someone was standing right behind her. "We're closer than you think." Laura closed her eyes, not in fear, but in acceptance, because this was no longer about hiding or pretending. She was just another face in a crowd. Her thoughts went back to Maya, to the way the child had looked at her, not like she was strong, but like she was someone who would stay. That look stayed with her, heavy and warm at the same time, and Laura understood then that leaving was no longer an option. She started the car and pulled into the road, not heading home, not heading anywhere safe, but moving forward anyway, because some moments change you without asking, and once they do, there is no going back to the person you were before. Laura drove for a while without knowing where she was going, because choosing a place felt harder than moving, and movement kept her steady. The road signs passed, familiar and unfamiliar at the same time, and she realized how long it had been since she let herself feel anything beyond getting through the day. Her phone stayed quiet after that last message, and the silence felt louder than any threat, because silence meant waiting. She thought about the men, not their faces but their patience, because patience meant planning, and planning meant this was bigger than one moment in a cafe. Her mind went back to the things she had signed, the things she had refused to change, the time she had said no when it would have been easier to look away, and she understood now why the past does not always stay buried just because you ask it to. She slowed near a traffic light and caught her reflection in the mirror, noticing how tired she looked, how much older her eyes felt than her years, and for the first time in a long while, she did not push that feeling away. She let it sit with her, heavy but honest, because pretending had brought her here. The light changed, and she drove on, feeling a quiet resolve settle in, not loud or proud, just firm, because some choices are made in silence and kept without applause. She reached a quiet stretch of road and pulled over, turning the engine off, because she needed one clear thought before the next step, and that thought came simple and sharp. She would not let this touch the child who had trusted her. Her phone vibrated once more, and this time she answered without speaking, holding it to her ear while the other side stayed silent. And then a voice finally came through, low and calm, saying her name like it had every right to say it, and Laura closed her eyes, because hearing her name told her everything she needed to know. They had never stopped watching, and whatever came next would not be gentle. Laura kept the phone to her ear, even after the line went quiet, because hanging up felt like giving them control. Her grip tightened, and she said nothing, waiting to see if the voice would return. But it didn't, and that silence told her more than words ever could. She started the car again and drove, slower this time, because rushing would only lead her somewhere careless. Her thoughts went back to the name the voice had spoken, her name, spoken without anger, without threat, like it belonged to them, and that hurt more than shouting ever could. She had spent years trying to turn herself into someone forgettable, someone who blended in, someone who could pass a day without being noticed, and now she knew that effort had failed. She thought of Maya again, not as a child in danger, but as a child who had already learned too much too early, and Laura felt a quiet promise form inside her. The kind you don't say out loud because saying it makes it fragile. She parked a few streets away from home and walked the rest of the way, because she needed to feel the ground under her feet, to remind herself she was still here, still breathing, still able to choose. When she reached her door, she did not go inside right away. Instead she stood there, listening, watching, noticing how normal everything looked, and that normal look made her uneasy, because normal was how danger hid best. Inside, she locked the door and leaned against it for a moment, her eyes closing as memories surfaced, faces she had not thought about in years, choices she had made when the cost was clear and the outcome uncertain. She remembered signing papers that felt wrong, refusing to change numbers that would have saved powerful people, and walking away when she was told it would be easier to stay quiet. Back then, she believed doing the right thing would end the story, not start it. Her phone buzzed again, this time a message, short and calm, saying, "We only want to talk," and Laura let out a slow breath, because talk was never just talk when it came this late. She sat down at the table and placed the phone face up in front of her, no longer hiding from it, and she spoke aloud to the empty room. "If you want to talk, you'll do it my way." And saying those words made her realize something important. They had found her, but they had not broken her. Not yet. Outside, somewhere she could not see, someone watched her light turn on, and someone else waited for her answer, and Laura knew the next choice she made would decide not just her own future, but the safety of a child who had trusted the wrong stranger for the right reason. Laura stayed at the table for a long time, not touching the phone, not turning it over, just letting it sit there where she could see it, because hiding it would have meant hiding from herself. Her mind kept moving back and forth between the past and the present, between who she had been and who she was now, and she saw clearly how those two lives had finally met. She thought about the files she had protected, the names she had refused to erase, and the moment she walked away knowing it would cost her peace but save her sleep. At the time, she believed distance would protect her, that time would blur faces and soften anger. Yet sitting there now, she understood that some truths do not fade, they wait. She picked up the phone at last and typed a short reply. Nothing clever, nothing brave, just words that felt honest. "I'm listening," and when she sent it, she felt a strange calm settle in her chest, because choosing to face something often brings more peace than running ever did. The reply came slower this time, as if measured, as if considered, and it said, "Good, we just want to clear things up," and Laura almost smiled at that, because people who want to clear things up do not wait in shadows. She stood and walked through her small home, checking the windows, the locks, not out of fear, but out of habit, because habits keep you alive when emotions get loud. Her thoughts returned to Maya again, not as a problem to solve, but as a person whose life could be shaped by what Laura chose next, and that thought pressed harder on her than any threat. Laura sat back down and whispered, "I won't let this touch her," and speaking it out loud made it real, made it binding. Her phone rang then, not vibrating, not warning, just ringing, and the sound felt heavier than it should have, because it meant this was no longer about messages or distance. She answered without greeting, and the voice on the other end spoke calmly, saying, "You always did listen when it mattered." And Laura closed her eyes, because she recognized that voice now, not from the café, but from a room years ago where decisions were traded like favors. She replied evenly, "Say what you came to say." And there was a pause, not long, but telling, before the voice said, "We need you to fix something you broke." And Laura felt the weight of that lie settle between them, because some people call truth a break when it no longer serves them. She leaned back in her chair, steady and clear, and said, "I didn't break anything, I stopped you." And for the first time, the voice lost its smoothness, just for a moment, and that moment told Laura she still had power. The call ended without goodbye, and Laura stayed seated, breathing slow, knowing this was no longer a warning, but a test. And as she looked at the door, she understood something else too. The story was no longer chasing her from behind. It was waiting ahead, and whatever came next would demand more than silence, more than hiding, and more than courage alone. Laura slept very little that night, not because she was afraid, but because her mind would not let go of the feeling that something had already started moving without her. Every small sound in the house made her open her eyes, not in panic, but in awareness, the kind that never really leaves once you've learned it. When morning came, she sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, staring at the floor, thinking about how easy it would be to pretend yesterday never happened, and how impossible that would be now. She made tea she barely touched, stood by the window without looking out too long, and tried to think like someone with options, even though she knew her options were narrowing. Her phone stayed quiet, and that quiet felt like pressure building, not relief. She thought again of Maya, of how quickly that child had trusted her, and how dangerous trust could be when placed in the wrong hands, and Laura felt the weight of that responsibility settle deeper. She decided then that before anyone else made the next move, she would make one first, not loud, not bold, just careful and deliberate. She left the house and drove across town, choosing roads she had not taken in years, passing places that held old memories she had packed away, because she knew the people watching her would expect her to go home or disappear, not to move toward her past. She stopped outside a low building that looked ordinary enough to be ignored, yet it held answers she had avoided for a long time. Inside, the air smelled of paper and old machines, and a man behind the desk looked up with surprise that turned slowly into recognition. "I wondered when you'd come back," he said, and Laura answered honestly, "So did I." They did not sit right away. They spoke standing, like people who did not fully trust the ground yet. Laura told him she was being watched again, and she did not soften the words, because soft words leave room for doubt. The man listened without interrupting, his face serious but not shocked, because some stories do not surprise people who have seen enough. When she finished, he said, "You knew this could happen?" And Laura nodded, because that truth had followed her for years. "I hoped it wouldn't," she replied, and the man said quietly, "Hope is not a plan." That line stayed with her as she left, because it was right. On her way back, her phone rang again, and this time she answered without hesitation. The voice on the other end sounded patient, almost kind, and that kindness felt like a trap. "You're moving," the voice said, and Laura replied, "So are you." And for a moment neither of them spoke. The voice then said, "We can end this quietly." And Laura felt a flash of anger, not sharp, but deep, because quiet endings usually belong to the powerful. She said, "You had your chance to end it quietly?" And the voice sighed, like someone disappointed, and said, "Then don't make this harder than it has to be." Laura ended the call and pulled over, resting her forehead against the steering wheel, not because she was tired, but because she needed to feel something solid before continuing. She thought of all the times she had been told to stay silent for her own good, of all the warnings dressed up as advice, and she realized that this moment was not asking her to be brave, it was asking her to be honest. When she drove again, she headed somewhere else, not back to the café, not to Maya, but to a place where her story could no longer be controlled by whispers and waiting. She did not know exactly how it would end yet, only that it could not end the way they wanted, and as she parked and stepped out, she felt that familiar pull again, stronger now, not as fear, but as resolve, because once you decide to stop hiding, the path forward becomes clear, even if it is not safe. Laura stood there for a moment before moving, because endings do not rush you, they wait to see if you are ready. The place she had come to was quiet, not hidden, just ignored, the kind of place people pass every day without seeing, and she understood why she had been drawn there now. She walked inside and spoke to the first person who looked up, not with anger, not with fear, but with the calm of someone who had already decided. She told the story the way it truly happened, without fixing words to protect anyone, without softening facts to make them easier to hear, and as she spoke, she felt something lift from her chest, not all at once, but slowly, piece by piece. The people listening did not interrupt, because some truths demand silence first, and when she finished, there was no applause, no comfort, just a shared understanding that something long buried had been brought back into the light. Laura left that place knowing she had crossed another line, one that could not be erased by time or pressure, and for the first time in years, she did not regret it. Her phone rang later that day, and she did not answer because she already knew what would be said, and some conversations lose their power when you refuse to play along. Instead, she drove back to the café, not because it was safe, but because that was where everything had changed. Maya was there again, sitting in the same spot, legs swinging, the dog close by, watching as always. When Maya saw Laura, her face softened, and she asked, "Did they stop?" And Laura did not lie. She said, "Not yet," and then added, "But they will." Maya nodded, trusting her in that simple way children do when they sense truth, and Laura felt the weight of that trust settle into something steady instead of heavy. They sat together without speaking much, sharing quiet the way people do when words are no longer needed, and as Laura stood to leave this time, the pull she felt was different, not a warning, not fear, but closure slowly taking shape. Outside, the street looked the same as it always had, cars moving, people passing, life going on without pause. Yet Laura knew that something inside her had finally come to rest. She had not won in the way stories often promise, but she had chosen honesty over silence, protection over comfort, and that choice had changed the shape of her life. As she walked away, she did not look back, not because she was afraid of what she might see, but because she no longer needed to, and that was how the story truly ended, not with noise or victory, but with a quiet strength that stayed. Thank you to my amazing family for staying with me until the end of this story. Your support means the world to me. If you enjoyed this journey, I just know you'll love what comes next. I've prepared something even more exciting and surprising that I can't wait to share with you. Just click on the end card appearing on your screen right now to watch the next one.